So the roof has the correct details out of the box for the most part. It has the AC unit in the correct location, the firecracker antenna in the correct location, and then it has the EOT antenna, which is all correct. The only things we need to do here are add conduit. A lot of these XSP units had conduit that ran to various radio antenna equipment mounted on the back of the clean air room here, and we're going to be adding all that. The parts I'm going to use for this are going to be the newer KV models lift rings. These guys right here, these are photo etch pieces made from stainless steel. These are really nice and easy to work with, so I'm going to drill some holes in the cab roof and install a couple of these. As for the actual wire and everything, I'm going to be using 15-inch phosphor bronze wire from Tichy. This is a great product to use for conduit. It's easy to work with, easy to bend. It's just like brass wire. So I'm going to make a few conduit pieces for the roof as well. There's two on each side, one here and one here. I'm just going to compare the prototype photos to basically get all of these lift rings in the correct location, and then I can add the conduit. There's also some grab irons that are mounted on the roof. There's a long grab iron on this section of the number board, and on the bottom I'm going to have to add those as well. So we'll get to that here in a second. I'll show you guys the progress as I go. So I've drilled a couple holes on the cab roof here. These two are for the grab iron that goes above the 6112 number board there. There'll be another grab iron that goes underneath that number board on the engineer side. We're going to have to add that. I'm going to probably wait to add that until I figure out what to do about the cab windows. I'm definitely going to have to fix these. You can see how bad those look. Really annoying. Ugh, God, I don't know what happened to that. Anyway, you can see I drilled the holes for the eye bolts all the way around. And I'm going to go ahead and install the eye bolts to these parts, and then we'll install the top grab iron as well. So it was a little tedious, but you can see we got all the details installed. I still got to add the grab iron under there, but like I said, I'm going to do some window work before I put that grab iron on. But I got the top iron on. Conduit with the eye bolts is installed. It runs all the way to the air cabinet room. And then you can see the conduit that runs all the way to the back of the air filter room again. Stops there. I used a little styrene to make the little block that's there on the prototype. But it came out pretty good. You can see just how much of a difference some of these basic little details can make. It looks really cool. So those parts will all be painted in due time. And you can see they look pretty good. So the next thing we're going to do is start working on some pilot details a little bit. We'll start getting those built up. So here we are looking at the prototype photos again, and we're going to be working on the pilot details, end details, that kind of thing next. So if we look at the top of the engine, you can see the class light plates and everything are accurate for the prototype. The thing we're going to have to do here, we'll have to slightly sand the pieces on the model for the class lights, and then we'll install the KV models class light blank plates. I'm going to have to replicate some of this patched outline later on. You can see the red stripes deteriorating around the class lights too. I'll add that later. We have the standard Union Pacific style MU Pepsi can style receptacle holder there. And on the pilot's standard details, we got the hose trays, which are basically small square boxes with the top cut out so that the hoses can be stored in them. We have the grab irons, and then we have the spare knuckle holders mounted just behind the second step. On the opposite side, same thing, hoses, hose tray. We have a very unusual style of air hose. We have just a pipe that has the hose hanging out of it. Very unusual style of air hose we're going to have to try to replicate on this model. I've never seen a hose like this. I don't know if this was specific for the tunnel motors, but then again I can't find very many photos of tunnel motors like this that had this same style air hose. It's kind of unusual in that regard. The other thing that's unusual about this is that it has a very interesting style of lift grab here, or a coupler lift bar rather. It's basically angled all the way up, and it's hidden underneath the anti-climber. This is something that on the stock model I'm not really going to be able to replicate exactly, but I am still going to try to replicate the squared angle coupler lift bar. It's a couple different details there in that it's kind of interesting actually in that regard. There's a couple interesting details on there that I'm going to have to replicate. As we look at the front of the model, or prototype rather, the things that we're going to have to do, we're going to have to install the ditch lights. I'm going to have to fabricate those from scratch. Have the Pepsi can style MU holder there. A couple of lift bar, which is stock on the model I'm going to keep. We have the Union Pacific North Little Rock style snowplow, and we have the air hose, which is a standard air hose, MU cables, that kind of thing. I'm not going to be using the stock plow on the Athearn model because it's a Southern Pacific style plow. I'm going to be using a newer Athearn plow for that detail, and I'll talk about that in a little while. But we got a lot of work to do here, so let's get started on the next steps of the build here. Starting with the rear pilot here, I've again manufactured a couple different parts. These are some scraps from the pilot. These are the pieces we don't need, the coupler lift bars. These are some scrap pieces of styrene, so ignore those. We have the custom bent coupler lift bar, and I've made some brackets for it as well. This is the new coupler lift bar, the really unusual one that we're going to be installing on the back. These are the platforms for the spare knuckles. I'm going to be putting my own spare knuckles on these later on. And then these are the hose trays. I haven't put the little bottom panel on these yet. I'm going to wait till I have them on the model, and then I can put the little bottom piece on these, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and install all these parts to the pilot. So Union Pacific locomotives use a special Pepsi can style MU cable holder on the back of their locomotives, mostly EMDs. In this case, I'm modeling this piece with a strip of 0.15-inch, or excuse me, 0.5-inch sheet styrene that I've cut to size. I've glued to the handrail, and I've taken a piece of styrene rod and I've glued this basically to this piece. Now I'm going to take a little bit more plastic styrene cement, put a good drop on there, and I'm going to let this piece bond very nicely, and then I can basically, once the glue starts setting up, I can kind of coax it into its final position like this. It's bent down on the prototype, something like that. But that's a common detail on Union Pacific locomotives. It's an easy one to replicate with some styrene, so I went ahead and add that to the rear pilot here. This will also go on the front pilot as well once we get to it. Real quickly, I want to talk about some modifications I made to the SD40T here, and this is only something I do on the SD40Ts. This is actually the first one I've had to do all this on. For one thing, the fans are wrong. They don't have the housing plates on the top. The real prototypes do have these, so I went ahead and modeled them on the Athearn model with styrene. As you can see, that's pretty self-explanatory. I wasn't going to change the fans or anything. All I had to do was just take those and add the styrene plate pieces. Those are literally 0.5-inch styrene cut to size and installed. The next thing I want to point out is the bracing on these two panels on the roof. On the radiator section, these have these divides, and it's only modeled on one section. On the dynamic blister here, you can see they modeled that strip. Brian Bana talked about this in more detail in his video on his tunnel motor build. I don't know if any of you follow Brian Bana, but he did a Copper State Railway SD40-2T build similar to this, and he talked about some of the reasons why Athearn did not model this bracing. But anyway, there's some bracing that runs all the way across the dynamic section onto the radiator hood here, and I just used 0.5-inch styrene to model these ribs, or these raised panel lines that are on the real prototype. I just copied some photos online, the placements, found where they needed to go, and I installed those as well. I also found a picture of an antenna plate, or not an antenna plate, a horn plate that got put on an SD40-2. I saw this plate, and I decided to add this on my model of 6112 because I thought it looked cool to have this old plate and then the new horn location, or the new horn stand added in the same area. I thought that looked pretty cool, so I went ahead and added that. But that's just some basic styrene modifications I did to the top here as well to enhance my model a little bit. The other little detail I tried to replicate out of styrene on the cab is the antenna base, or rather the area that was filled in after the antennas were removed on the roof here. This used to have the dual antennas right behind the AC unit here on the roof, and I tried to model the patch plate. You don't see too many people model this, and I don't think anyone makes a detailed part like this, but some of these tunnel motors did have that little plate. It's like, it almost looks like an access hatch, and it has a couple rivets, and it's basically welded. What I did to make it look like it was welded onto the air filter box was I kind of sloppily took some styrene cement and went around the edge to make it look like a weld bead. As you can see, that raised little edge. Once that's painted, it'll look really cool, and then I can rust it up and make it look mismatched and stuff. So that's another cool little detail, along with all the other antenna and conduit. It's pretty cool. So you can see all the styrene work on the cab roof is done now. So as we look at everything we've done on the rear end of this locomotive here, it's pretty much completed at this point. We're ready to start paint matching everything. You can see that we've done quite a bit of detailing. Looking at the pilot itself, we have all the nice details. The thing I had to do on the pilot was add the cutouts. This is a very specific feature that you see on only the tunnel motors on the SD45 and SD40-2TR variants. They have these cutouts. I was not able to do these on the front pilot because of the way the anti-climber is positioned. In order for me to put them in, I'd have to take the anti-climber off. I really don't want to do that. I'd rather like to leave that on. So they're really hard to notice too on the front pilot, so I'm going to ignore this step on the front. But on the back, they're visible right underneath the coupler lift bar. So I've added these with a small drill bit, filed them out, rounded the ends off, and it turned out pretty good. We have the arrows, or rather the MU cable boxes on both sides. We have the plates for the spare knuckles. We have the custom brake hose, and then we have the receptacle holder. It's kind of hard to see, but underneath here I've also installed the Detail Associates MU receptacle. Later on I'll put the plate cap on this, but for now it's going to stay like that because we have to paint it. Looking at the top, we've added the BLMA covers to the class lights. Up top was something I forgot to add, and I realized that the model didn't have these, but the tunnel motors have these special lift rings, and I've added these parts. These are just 15-inch styrene with holes drilled out in them, cut and rounded to size, and glued in place on the model. So the back end's pretty much done. We can go ahead and start working on some other details. I'm going to start doing some stuff on the cab sides next. So looking at the cab sides here, the only thing we really need to do here is add the little deflectors to the front of the cab on here. The only other thing I had to do up here, by the way, pointing this out, I had to replace the sun visor railing. It was damaged on my model, the stock part was, so I had to replace that with a brass piece, and then I reinstalled the sunshade. So I'll just put that out there in case you're wondering why it looks like this. Anyway, we need to add the little visor, and I've made these pieces out of styrene because no one makes the actual style, the modern style with the rounded corner. If I actually take the piece, and if hopefully it will focus, you can see that I've taken a piece and I've painted it a flat bare metal color, and I'm basically going to install this onto the cab sides on both sides. And here you can see the piece has been installed. I just installed it right along the front of the cab windows here. On the opposite side, I've had it so that it's folded down, that way I can have the sunshade hanging over it. But that's just another nice detail that I like to add to these models. If it's on the prototype, I'll usually make that. There are detail parts, like I said, available for these, but in this particular case I had to fabricate these.